Moadim L'Simcha, and happy Passover to everyone. This is a Dvar Torah that I shared at the Seder table this year. It's also appropriate for the seventh day of Passover, since we'll be reading about the parting of the Red Sea then. Following this Dvar Torah, you can stay watching this video in order to watch a class in which I go over some of the texts that are related to the points I make here. Famously, during the Seder, we spill drops of wine as we recite the 10 plagues. Generally, we see this as a reflection of the idea that we lament the suffering of the Egyptians that they endured as part of our Exodus story. As we think about this concept, our attention is often drawn toward a midrash in which the angels see the parting of the Red Sea and want to sing God's praises, but God stops them. Interestingly, there are a few different midrashic traditions as to why God stops the angels from singing, which I discussed further in the class that follows this Dvar Torah. In some versions, the angels want to sing to God while the Israelites are still passing through the Red Sea. And God says to them, "My people," meaning Israel, "are in trouble, and you want to sing to me?" In another version, God doesn't object to the angels singing, but says, repurposing the words of Exodus 15:1, "Az yashir Moshe uvenei Yisrael." Now Moses and the children of Israel will sing, meaning the angels should only sing after the Israelites have had the opportunity to do so. But the Babylonian Talmud sees it differently in Tractate Megillah and Sanhedrin. Instead, the angels want to sing to God as the Egyptians are drowning in the sea, and God responds, "Ma'aseh yadai tovim bayam va'atem omerim shira." My creations are drowning in the sea, and you sing? I've often heard discussions asking why it was okay for the Israelites to sing at the sea, while God objected to the angels doing so. There are some reasonable distinctions between the Israelites and the angels that may explain this. For instance, the Israelites were in mortal and immediate danger and had just been freed from slavery, while the angels were not in danger at all. But a Dvar Torah that I gave when we last read from the Torah about the parting of the Red Sea got me thinking. There, I noted that when the Israelites were in a panic about the Egyptians pursuing them, Moshe told them, "Al tira'u hitiatzvu uru'u yeshuat Adonai asher ya'aseh lechem." Fear not, stand by and see the Lord's salvation, which the Lord will do for you today. But then God said to Moshe, "Ma titzak elai, daber el bnei Yisrael v'yisa'u." What are you crying out to me? Tell the children of Israel to move, implying that what Moshe should have done was tell the Israelites to do whatever it is they were capable of doing at that moment. In that Dvar Torah, I discussed the implication that a prophet was expected to act on a prophet's own initiative, even if sometimes their conclusions might turn out to be at odds with the divine will. Based on this thought, I got to wondering if maybe the Talmud implies that Moshe and Miriam leading the Israelites in song at the sea, while certainly understandable in the circumstances, might not have been the best reaction. Looking closely at the text of the Talmud, there might be some implication of this, in that the Talmud says that while God does not rejoice at the downfall of the wicked, God does cause others to rejoice at the downfall, citing as an example the celebration by Israel's enemies at Israel's downfall, which might imply that such responses, while understandable, are not necessarily laudable. Regardless of whether Moshe and Miriam were right to lead the Israelites in song at the sea, I think we can see a common thread in the difference between God's and Moshe's response to the situation immediately prior and immediately after the parting of the sea. In both instances, Moshe's instinct is to aggrandize God, while God's instinct is to emphasize the importance of humanity. As the Israelites feel trapped, Moshe tells them to await God's salvation. God tells Moshe that the Israelites should do whatever was within their capacity to do at the moment. After the Israelites survive the situation, Moshe's instinct is to lead the Israelites in a song celebrating God's feat. God's instinct is to recognize the human tragedy of the moment. As we celebrate Passover, praising God for taking us out of Egypt, we should be thinking about what that story tells us about what we can and should do, much as God tells Moshe that the Israelites at the Red Sea should do what they could. We can learn a lot about what we can and should do from God's response to the angels. We need to focus on recognizing human suffering and to see that human suffering, even if we think it is justified, as a tragedy, and to work to create a world that minimizes such suffering in the future. Wishing everyone again a very happy and meaningful Passover. What I put together is a little bit of something I've been thinking about. A couple of weeks ago, I shared a Dvar Torah on Bishalach that went off on the idea. It seems pretty clear to me that the Kadosh Baruch Hu disagrees with Moshe Rabbeinu's advice to the people before the parting of the Red Sea, where Moshe Rabbeinu says, basically, be quiet, God will take care of you, etc. And God's response to Moshe is, Ma titzak elai, daber el bnei Yisrael v'yisau. Why are you, crying out to me? Speak to Bnei Israel and move. And I wrote a Dvar Torah about how the Nevi'im acted on their own initiative, that was something that they should do. Sometimes they got things right, sometimes they got things wrong. Rabbi Pilavin, by the way, recently emailed out a very important reference to a Gemara listing 3 times where Moshe Rabbeinu acted on his own accord, according to the Gemara, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu agreed with Moshe Rabbeinu's actions. So in writing this, I also referenced Miriam and Moshe taking the initiative to sing at the sea. So I remembered a while ago hearing a Dvar Torah about why is it that if the angels, as we'll see inside in a moment, with the angels wanted to sing to the Kadosh Baruch Hu at the sea, and God stopped them. If it wasn't okay for them to sing at the sea, why was it okay for Bnei Israel to sing at the sea? And it's a common question, and I've heard different answers. I think the most reasonable one is that that the angels were not personally saved at the moment of crossing the Red Sea, whereas Bnei Israel were very much experiencing their own salvation. And that's a perfectly reasonable answer to that question. But the question, at least as I've always heard it presented, was it had to have been okay for Moshe Rabbeinu to do this. And therefore, let's figure out why it was okay. As opposed to stepping one further step backward and say, well, was that necessarily the right response to Kriyat Yam Suf? And I had some reasons why I wanted to think that maybe it wasn't, and I'll get into that a little bit. But my first question was to look at the source of this story to say, do I have a leg to stand on? Is there any implication one way or another in the text of this story to suggest that it was good or bad for Moshe and Miriam to have led the people in song at that moment, and just to see where the text falls. And so I'm going to take a look at the text. I will say that my editing of this may not be as good as it might otherwise have been, because I wrote this up earlier in the week, and for whatever reason, I had landed on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, where this midrash comes up, and I translated it and I prepared it. And for whatever reason, wherever I looked for a source for this, first referenced the Gemara in Psachim, and I knew there was a parallel in Megillah that I'd read quickly before, and then over Shabbat, this Shabbat, I picked up the Gemara in Megillah to read the Sugya again, and I realized that a lot of my problems with the Gemara in Sanhedrin, I had a couple of things that I didn't think fit quite right, and that they fit a lot better in the Gemara and Megillah. And I am not qualified to make this speculation, but it seemed to me likely that the Gemara in Megillah presents a more original form of the discussion, and some of the disjuncts that I picked up on in Sanhedrin were because it was taking the discussion more along the lines of what we see in Sanhedrin, and more or less what we see in Megillah, and then in Sanhedrin it was being retrofit a little bit to that Gemara. So anyway, so I decided last night to write this up more, keying on the Gemara in Megillah. So what do we have? We have Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, although very questionable if it's really Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi or perhaps Rabbi Yoshua, perhaps even Rabbi Yossi. I have a footnote on that I won't get into. Patach la pitcha lahai parshata mehacha. Rabbi Yeshua would introduce either the Megillah in toto or some part of the Megillah with the following introduction, the Petichta, which we expect will take a verse from out of nowhere and bring us around to the Megillah. V'haya ka'asher sas Adonai aleichem lehetev etchem ken yasis laharatchem. The Gemara in the Torah in Dvarim says that just as God delighted in doing well for you, so will the Kadosh Baruch Hu delight. And leharatchem is not a direct quote from the Torah. My footnote has the full verse, but basically, just as God will has enjoyed doing good for you, God will enjoy doing evil to you when you go astray. This is from the Tochacha. And so the question asked, seemingly part of this Petichta, although I wonder if maybe this is slightly interpolated in. Umi chadei hakadosh baruch hu b'mapalatan shel reshaim. Does the Kadosh Baruch Hu celebrate the downfall of the wicked? V'hakativ b'tzeit lifnei hachalutz ve'amrim hodu ladonai ki le'olam chasto. So we have a verse in Chronicles that tells us when the army goes out, they say, praise is the Lord, his grace is everlasting. Ve'amar Rabbi Yochanan, and in some versions Rabbi Yonatan, mipnei ma lo ne'emar ki tov. So why is it that we have many, many verses, which I list here, Hodu ladonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasto. And the only time in Tanakh that I could find where it's just Hodu ladonai ki le'olam chasto without the ki tov is here. And so Rabbi Yochanan says, why doesn't this verse have ki tov? Lifi she'ein hakadosh baruch hu sameach b'mapalatan shel rashaim. Because the defeat of evildoers is not a cause for celebration in God's eyes. And then it goes on to Ve'amar Rabbi Yochanan, another teaching similar, and here's where we get to our main text. My dichtiv ve'lo karav ze el ze kol halayla. What does it mean when it says one or the other did not get close to the other all the night. This is as Egypt is pursuing Bnei Israel, and for that night before, they don't get closer, and seemingly the Gemara is not at all clear where this drush comes. There are similar midrashim, one of which we'll maybe take a quick look at a little bit later, that make sense. The key words here are zeh el zeh, and that just as zeh el zeh is the introduction of the kedusha as the angels are coming to praise God. The pasuk that says that the two camps didn't come closer, zeh el zeh, is kind of a reference that the angels wanted to, so that bakshu malachei hasharet lomar shira. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ma'aseh Yada Tovim Bayam V'Etem Omerim Shira. The Kadosh Baruch Hu says, my creations are drowning in the sea, and you want to sing to me. Amar Revi Alaza. So essentially, question mark. What do you mean over here that God is going to celebrate your downfall? Because God doesn't celebrate the downfall of evildoers. Rabbi Elazar, hu eno sas aval acherim masis. God doesn't celebrate. He isn't joyful at this happening. V'daika nami dichtiv kain yasis. Here taken as a causative, a hif'il. It's reading rather than God will celebrate your everything bad having to. Rather, God will call others to celebrate. So it's ken yasis velo kativ yasus, and it doesn't say yasus. Learn from there. And actually, I think like I said, my editing isn't entirely clear, so I probably didn't want to have this Hebrew text here because it's is down here. Don't say I didn't warn you. So before getting into to thinking about the point of this, it's interesting. This is presented as a petichta, as an introduction to Megillat Esther, and so Rashi, I think, is trying to explain how it functions as a petichta, and he says acherim masis, that God calls others to celebrate, seemingly meaning when Israel became worthy of destruction in the days of Haman, hayu oyevehim semechin lahen. Their enemies were overjoyed, and so here I think it's a kind of a very interesting introduction to Megillat Esther, and I think what's quite striking here is this whole thing about God not celebrating the downfall of the wicked is framed less around the Song of the Sea than around the Tochacha and the destruction of the Israelites, and taking in I think fairly poignantly in a way, trying to take some of the bite out of the Tochacha, and saying that it seems to be reinterpreting this, God will delight as no, God will allow others to delight. Now, stepping back to kind of my question is, what about the Song of the Sea, where we have Bnei Yisrael celebrating the downfall of the Egyptians? And it seems to me you could read that very similarly to the way God's response to the downfall of the Israelites, which is to say that yes, God brought about that song, and it might be, so to speak, a necessary evil, but it doesn't necessarily imply that such celebrations are correct, unless we want to say that that Haman and his people were correct to celebrate the opportunity or the expected downfall of the expected destruction of the Israelites. I think it would follow that we ought not assume too quickly that celebrating the suffering of the Egyptians, and the Shirat Hayam very much celebrates the suffering of the Egyptians, as do a number of midrashim. That maybe this suggests that isn't the most laudable of approach. Certainly understandable, and we could also, if we want to, distinguish that that Haman was not threatened by the Jews in the same way that the Israelites were clearly threatened by Egypt, and that that at least provides some at least understanding for why they would be in such a celebratory mood. But I think it still does invite us in some ways to think about whether that was yes, whether that was the best response. I have.
Can I just ask a question?
Please.
One of the parallels to this midrash is where Bikshu Malacheh Sharet Lomar Shira, and then the parallel says, Amar Lifnehem Akadosh Baruch Hu Banai Nitunim B'Tzara V'Atem Mevatim.
Okay, so Rabbi Pilivin is pushing us a little bit farther ahead, which is all good, and I'll scroll down to that a little bit. And I do have here from Shmot Rabbah a parallel story, but a different story. So it's kind of the same type of thing. It's partially comes off of, and also it's somewhat of a petichta style, achar noganim, that the singers come before the musicians. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, bikshu malachim lomar shira lifnei hakadosh baruch hu ve'otah halayla. So that's that same night, the angels wanted to sing to God. Amar lahem ligyonothai nitunim betzara vatem omerim lefanai shira. This seems to be, they're still like in the sea at the time. And I guess the angels, in anticipation of the outcome, are ready to sing. And then God says, my people are still my legions are languishing, and they're still in danger, and you want to sing. And then there's a following midrash similarly that they want to sing after everything is better, and God says, well, let Israel sing first, and that's Hadahu Dichtiv Az Yashir Moshe. And by the way, this midrash helps also clarify. It has a little bit more, if I recall, of a quotation from Yeshayahu that makes it clear that the drush about the delay is coming from the similarity of the Karazel. So this midrash very much seems to be much more accepting, and even saying that God called for the Israelites to sing. So
this is a deep shot in Torah lo l'malacheh sharet nitna.
Right. Yeah. So this is interesting. This midrash very much, or at least I think pretty clearly, approves of Bnei Israel singing at the sea, and even that reading Az Yashir Moshe as being less historical note than divine commandment or divine request, etc. So that's very easy, interesting. So I do think there's in these two texts possibly two very different attitudes towards towards Shirat Hayam. Admittedly, the Gemara it doesn't say one way or another, but I think the background could be fairly disapproving of the song, or at least lead one to question the propriety of the song, whereas the Midrash in Shemot Rabbah does not have that. Any other comments or questions before I, one or two other textual points to it?
I'll just mention one of my teachers at Hebrew University, Yosef Heinemann, alav shalom. This is one of the chapters of his book called Ha'agadot V'Toldotehen, where he talks about the migration of different midrashim, sometimes with diametrically opposed points.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, the difference between Banai Nitunim B'Tzara and Malachei Masei Yadai Tovim Bayad. In one case, the sympathy is for the Egyptians; in the other case, for Bnei Israel.
And that is a stark contrast. That is absolutely right there. So it's interesting. You have this. Probably you have this midrash about like the angels wanting to sing, and then like different opinions as to why God is putting the kibosh, or at least the pause button, on those songs.
And one very interesting, I think you started to address this in your version of this on the website, is also the question of when do you ask a shaila, as it were,
right,
versus paskening from the kishkas,
right,
for lack of a more technical way of putting it. The other biblical example would be David HaMelech, who sometimes is very makpid to check things out with the Urim V'Tumim, and sometimes just goes ahead and does certain things. And sometimes it doesn't seem that he's reserving the Urim V'Tumim for the most serious questions.
Yeah.
But, all right.
I hear. So I just wanted to also quickly take a look at the Mishnah and Sanhedrin and the Gemara there. So the Mishnah and Sanhedrin is on Ketzad Ma'amin, how you give warning to witnesses for capital cases. And after scaring the wits out of them, there's a couple of lines of, but don't be too afraid, your testimony is important. And one of the reasons why it's important, because it's already said, Ba'avod Risha'im Rina, that in the downfall of the evil, there is celebration. And the Gemara goes on and associates that verse with another verse. And then it splices in, Umichare kudsha brichu b'maltan shel Risha'im. Does the Kadosh Baruch Hu celebrate the downfall of evildoers, and follows along what we saw in the Mishnah. Now, when I first read this, I was like, wait, hold on. We have this Mishnah that talks about people or some celebration, doesn't say who's celebrating, and then saying that it is Achav who is the Rasha who is referred to in that verse, essentially. And so, does God celebrate the downfall of the evildoers? Really didn't sit well with me as a question on these couple of statements. And so that's why I said it looks to me more this is being spliced in, but the Petichta style and having and that this question is really a response to the Tochacha, as we saw in Megillah, seems reasonable. Now, the Gemara in Sanhedrin does end up with Daika Nami Dichtiv Yasus, but like that verse doesn't even come into the Gemara until the very end. And so there's a number of reasons why, at least at first blush, it looks like the Gemara in Megillah is more an earlier version of this discussion. That's at least what it seems to me. But I do also think it's kind of interesting that it was decided to include this teaching here in this Gemara in Sanhedrin, which kind of like the Mishnah at least is talking about like, well, you should really testify because the celebration from the downfall of evildoers, and it seems splicing in from this teaching about the song of the sea, or the angels at the sea, etc., kind of reminds us that even for the person who is a duly convicted criminal, that while people might celebrate the comeuppance that comes to the person who's duly convicted of capital crime, that is not necessarily the way the Kadosh Baruch Hu looks at that situation, and that the Kadosh Baruch Hu maybe still sees reason for lament, which is interesting. It's still saying to the witnesses, you still have to testify. It's still a good thing. It's still important. It's still what needs to happen. But at the same point, it's not necessarily something really worthy of celebration. And so one of the reasons why I was thinking about this is it interested me if one were to assume that based on this midrash, that maybe it wasn't the greatest thing for Moshe Rabbeinu and Miriam Hanaviah to sing the Song of the Sea. Then an interesting question would be, like, it's almost like the bookends to the story are Moshe not necessarily doing the best thing, and to wonder why about that, and if there's some common threads there. And in a way, it strikes me that in both situations, the Moshe Rabbeinu's interest or instinct is to aggrandize the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that in both situations, maybe the better approach would have been to recognize the significance of humanity, so that Moshe Rabbeinu, as Egypt approaches, says to people, be quiet, don't worry about it. God will take care of it. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, no, Moshe, no. It's tell the people they got to do what they can. They have to, however exactly you interpret that Deber B'nai Yisrael, just like, don't turn to me. You still have what to do. And at the same time, that the response after the parting of the Red Sea is very understandable relief, celebration, Schadenfreude, as Rabbi Pilavin aptly put it, but that maybe a different response or would have been to follow the Kadosh Baruch Hu and to first recognize the human tragedy, and to recognize that even for the Egyptians who were the oppressors of the Israelites, the fact that they were the oppressors of the Israelites was a tragedy, and the fact that they did not succeed in doing tshuva and therefore had to perish at the sea was also a tragedy, and that perhaps the first thing worthy of recognition at that moment is that human tragedy.
Interesting. Lo tita'ev mitzri. So there are times in which what we do with historical memory is interesting. Sometimes, obviously, the Midrashim and in Yoma that try to humanize Shaul and his dealing with the mitzvah of Mechiat Amalek, and Vayarev Banachal, understood by the Gemara and Yoma as referring to not lying in ambush, but wrestling with himself over the issue, and recalling the moral example of the Agla Rufa and so on.
It is. I think there's a lot to be said for understanding where people come from and what those reactions are, and also wondering like I wondering where we could do better or have different perspectives. I kind of I lost my train of thought a little bit. I apologize. But we often, I think it's okay to say, that humans react very understandably, etc. And we don't want to, God forbid, bring too much negative judgment. But at the same point, the whole purpose the of Matan Torah is to let us know that humanity doesn't always get it right, and that we're always meant to aspire to do better and reconsider, and not to assume that what we've always done or the way we've always looked at it is always the right way to look at it. And instead that sometimes we need the Kadosh Baruch Hu to remind us that there's a different way to see things.
I think Rabbi Billivan's comment was the key that opens this up correctly. In the pasuk Lo tita'ev mitzri ki ger hayita v'arto, it's like Lo tikam v'lo titor b'nei yamecha. The chiyuv of not having grudges and letting things go, let them gain, as Blazing Saddle says. It's a good thing to do because the praise of Shiras Hayam was for the Kodesh Baruch Hu. It didn't really emphasize the destruction of the Egyptians. But the first kind of midrash is Pesher commentary, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, where you tell the story in your own words. Like the Gospels are Pesher, like the Genesis Apocrypha. We retell the story in our own words. On Seder night, we do a Pesher. We tell them in our own stories. That's a Haggadah. It's a telling. It's not a Kriya. It's not called a Kriya. It's called a Haggadah. And the Song of the Sea is based on an intertextual Pesher internal Bible commentary. Ramban calls this, we call this foreshadowing. Ramban says, Maseh Avot Siman Levanim. When Pharaoh says in his last command in Shmos chapter 1, you throw the baby into the river. While we're praising Hashem in Exodus 15, Sus v'rachbo yara bayam. In other words, God, we're praising God. We're describing what the Egyptians did, but we don't dwell on that. Pharaoh is all ego. He has an eye problem. He's punished for that. But it stresses God's redemption. And we're not supposed to have the feeling of grudges. You see this in David HaMelech at the end of Shmuel Aleph. We learned that when we were learning Shmuel and UTJ. In the end of Shmuel, you have David finding an Egyptian slave who was rejected by the Amalekites, and David nurses him back to health. That means there was a sacred dvarim in the time of Moshe, in the time of David, because you don't fulfill a mitzvah of Lo tita'ev mitzri ki ger hayisa v'arto, but taking care of this Egyptian guy, because we don't hold grudges. That's something that the Jewish people has to learn.
By the way, I imagine some of the references to the Song of the Sea as a retelling will play a major role in Professor Kimmelman's webinar on March 9th, which is no, actually I think it's the one that on April 6th that is about how the Song of the Sea relates to the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So I think more to follow on some of those topics.
Kiyad al Case Yad, when we're talking about how we should react to Amalek. So in that spirit, I say perhaps these things should be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Because there were not all Rishayim are created equal. I mean, there were the ones where it says Lo Tita'ev, and there were the grudges that we do bear. Edom and Moab, of course, we have a little bit less forgiving. Amalek. Shaul not forgiven for forgiving them. I mean, just so maybe the only resolution is to say that tradition speaks with multiple voices on this
Amen.
basic issue.